Good day, Chairman. Good day to you listeners and viewers out there in TV and podcast land. We welcome you to another wonderful episode of the Chairmen of the Boards. And this is going to be an opportunity for some self-reflection for many of us. I can include myself in this category as well. But it's about the core question of, should you attempt to emulate and copy, if we're going to get just right down to it, your guitar heroes? Should you emulate the gear that they have in order to sound like the players that you like best? And it's a very interesting question, because if you go to most pedal amplifier guitar companies' marketing departments, they will most certainly create a causal link between the equipment that you have and your likelihood to sound more like your guitar hero, because it's a very natural thing for us all to want. However, we're going to discuss today whether it is an advantage to you to try to sound like that, or using the same exact gear, whether potentially approximations of that gear will get you to that place, or maybe whether it will be a totally dissimilar piece of gear for you, because ultimately our hands do have a sound. You know, some people have brighter hands, some people have darker hands, some people have medium hands, whatever that means to you. And there's just things that will fundamentally be different because of the chemistry and makeup of your body that will have you sounding dissimilar, even if you did everything the same. You copied, let's say, John Mayer's breakfast routine, and you copied John Mayer's workout routine, and you copied John Mayer's practice routine, and you learned all of his songs. Even with using the same gear, you may not even sound the same. So these are all just things that we should be honest with ourselves about, and I think we're going to talk about today, because I know that I've certainly built some inspired by pedalboard rigs in the past, and I'm certainly sure that you guys have done some of the same. What do you guys think about this generally, given that you've likely done this for your customers in the past? Who of you would like to start?
Come on, Brian.
Yeah, I would say I definitely get that group of people that, it's not a whole group of people, but people that will come in and they're like, yeah, like I really want to sound like this player. Excuse me. But most of the time they don't do the research. That's a big one, because they don't actually know. They just say, make me sound like this person. Okay, well, they play these different genres, or these, not different genres, they play these different styles of music. It's like Mayer, like that. Like, you can't say, make me sound like John Mayer. It's like, well, which one? Like, which, like, album or era or whatever that he had played. But it always comes down to, like, you'll never... I personally think that, like, I'll never sound like that certain player, because I'm very... I think there's a lot of tone is in the hands personally. Like we talked about, just because there's been plenty of rigs I've done for Andy Timmons, and Andy plays on it and it sounds just like him. Like, I was working the other day and I heard someone play guitar. I was like, oh, that sounds like Andy. And then I heard the guitar bend and I knew exactly who it was, because not anyone can get that type of voicing. It's just something that he has done that I'm like, oh, I know who that is. So you can try all you want. You can buy every guitar, every string, down to the cable, to the wire, to the pedal that you have. But I don't think you're going to be identical. I think people can get close to the tone, but I don't think they'll be like, oh yeah, I could replace that guitarist and no one would know. I think there's so many aspects because of how they're bending the strings or how hard they're pressing down, with their hand. There's so many things. So I don't ever discourage people from doing it. I just tell them, like, listen, like, I'm more than happy to do this, but you have to know that it may not be exactly identical, but we'll do our best to get you there.
I need to start my answer with a bit of a caveat. Mason, you're hosting this episode, so if you don't want to take it where I'm about to suggest, please stop me. But I think the question honestly goes a lot deeper than what I agree with what you guys are saying, but I think it goes deeper than that. And I think if music is a language, which I think is why we all love it so much, it has a way of communicating things that sometimes we can't put into words. And I think this is a philosophical question in part that we're asking right now. And I know that that's not what you guys intended when we started this episode, but like life experience comes into this, and where you grew up, what your, I don't know, life was like as a kid and into your, formative years all affects how you communicate, both in how you talk to people and interact and how you play music as an instrument. And so that's where I think this question of should you emulate your guitar heroes is almost beside the point. I think the question almost has to be like, can you emulate your guitar heroes? Because you can't live the life that they've lived. You won't make the gear choices they made from the same context or point of view, because you can't. It's just not possible. But in saying that, that's I guess kind of the abstract thought I have on this. But in terms of should you emulate your guitar heroes, knowing that, I absolutely think it's a noble pursuit. And the reason being, and I'll say it with another caveat, I don't think you should just buy their gear. I think if you're just trying to buy their gear to sound like them, I think it's a wasted effort, waste of money, waste of time. If you're trying to buy their gear and you are going to train your ear to find a tone, in this case being your guitar hero's tone, and you're going to sit down and put the work in, I think that will make you a much better guitar player. And I think the more that you can do this, the more guitar heroes you can try and do this with. So maybe you try and do this with, SRV for 6 months and you really just dial in on his tone. Then you try and do it with Mayer. And then maybe you go into an AC/DC phase and try and do it there. You will, your ear will grow and be able to adapt and find tones quicker every time you do it because you put in the work. But if you bought all those people's gear and just like, why don't I sound like them? I think that is personally, if I'm going to put it bluntly, a total waste of time if you aren't going to put in the work.
I'm a little surprised that you refer to them as AC/DC as a former resident of Australia.
Sorry, Akadaka.
Yeah. They almost pulled your Aussie card there.
Sorry, man. I should have said it with a horrible Aussie accent. Not that the Aussie accent is horrible. My interpretation of it is horrible. I can't do it. But I just didn't have the guts to do it today, guys. I'm sorry.
I hear what you're saying here, Grant. And I think that I don't fault anybody for going after somebody else's sound. And I do think that there is a certain amount that you're responsible for within yourself as far as your hands and your practice routine. And I think something that's emblematic of this is that phrasing produces a lot of the sound that sort of makes up the archetype of a specific player. Just as Brian alluded to, hearing a certain way that somebody played and knowing that it was Andy Timmons, and somebody saying, well, I've heard Robin Ford without his Dumble and he still sounds exactly like Robin Ford. Or even, aligned with this or kind of related to this, when you hear somebody kind of play a Robin Ford style lick, even on maybe a non-Dumble style pedal, a lot of people say, oh, that has a really Dumble quality to it. And do they actually mean that it has a Dumble quality to it? Or does it mean that the phrasing that the person used is representative of the type of phrasing that you would have heard from a Dumble user like a Robin Ford or a Larry Carlton, because they kind of have a specific way that they go about, let's say, playing a pentatonic scale or something like that. And so I think that sometimes there is a confusion with phrasing and gear. So somebody hears a certain way that somebody approaches a scale or a blues solo, and they say, oh, that sounds like a Dumble. And it turns out that they were using a Boss DS2 or whatever it may be, that doesn't have anything to do with Dumble. And so I do think that there's a phrasing element here that shouldn't be overlooked. And I also want to say that I think that when sometimes we're trying to find our own voice on the guitar, having an example to kind of follow for a time as you start to develop your own voice is important, and I think probably common in the journey of most guitar players, that they start out as Clapton fans or Mayer fans or Jimmy Page fans or Jimi Hendrix fans, and they kind of run with that lineage, and then they start to sort of develop a stylistic sort of signature sound of their own, and those artists kind of help them move to that place. And those artists likely maybe had those same people or had similar people that they were, that they were following to kind of get their sound. But I guess the bigger question is, if I'm, for example, I know that we're using John Mayer a lot, but I think that that's something that a lot of people, at least from our generations, relate to. If I went and I bought every single component of his rig and I wired it up the same, or at least to the degree that it's known to the public, and I got his same exact amps, and I got everything, all the same guitars, am I going to be able to play those songs and get it to sound like him? Let's just say, even if you put in the practice, do you even have the environment where you can have amps that are that loud and play to an arena or have a space that emulates an arena and a sound man and that incredible band of his and all these other elements? Like, how much of this is part of the X factor, or how much of it is just like we have to kind of take this example and then modulate it to say, okay, we know that he has this crazy rig that's got 20 plus pedals, but what are sort of the staples that we can take from this, that, like, if I want to go for that and I want to get myself a little further than just the phrasing, I can use these elements, these core elements of the sound, and that's really what I should be focusing on.
Yeah.
Like, where do you feel like the balance is in that? Like, in terms of going for every single piece versus trying to just find the core pieces that kind of make up what that is.
If I could speak from experience, similar lines to what Brian said about Andy and what you said, Mason, about the phrasing versus the actual hardware that's being used. If I had to, and I'll throw out a statement, and I'm curious what you guys will think. If I had to choose in terms of getting closer to someone's tone, we're on the John Mayer track. If I had to choose to sound the most like John Mayer, and I had to pick his exact rig or the ability to absolutely nail his technique, I personally believe technique would get me much closer than his gear would. In terms of, if you were to close your eyes, which one's John Mayer? I think I could play an Ibanez into, a Fender Deluxe, which is a John Mayer-ish amp, obviously, but I could pick some very un-John Mayer gear, and I could convince you that I am John Mayer quicker with his technique than I could with his gear.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was really hoping someone would disagree with me on that. I wanted to just fire it up.
No. Well, that's the thing is that, and I've seen people have commented before, and it's not like the old man get off my lawn kind of thought process, but in a way of like, people like, stop buying gear and like practice, work on your stuff, because it's easy. Yeah. It's easy to sit on your couch and to buy hundreds of dollars worth of guitar pedals. But sitting on the couch for an hour of the practice, that sounds exhausting. Like, you're just like, it's one of those things that's so easy just to like, well, I'll buy this pedal because like, it's like, I'm going to go off the John Mayer track trains because we've been on it. But like, he blacks out all of his pedals from what we talked about because he doesn't want people to like get all crazy and buy exactly all the pedals he has. And like, cause he's using what he wants for his sound. And like, there's multiple people I know, like Mark Lettieri with Snarky Puppy. You plug them into literally any rig. It doesn't matter what it is, and they're gonna sound like them. Like Andy was playing on our demo board at the shop with some random pedal, not even the Halo. I think it was like the Nemesis delay or something, and like some Mesa. He uses Mesa, but like that's what he's using with some off the wall guitar Strat, but it sounded just like him. And he didn't retweak anything. He literally just sat down, plugged it in because he was playing a pedal for someone that was buying something. I can't remember. But he sounded identical to him. And within 20 minutes later, someone else sat down, literally same everything, after hearing him play and started trying to play. Sounded nothing like him. Because it's all about his technique and how he's phrasing and how he's playing, and like it's even like someone, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, but it's even about like the pressure of the pushing, like how much pressure you're using on the strings. Like there's all these things I've heard through people that are like, oh yeah, to bend this, I'm doing this, and I'm like, wow, I never would have thought that. So yeah, I do agree with you on that. It's all about, I think gear helps, but I think a huge part about it is technique. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. Can I make another statement to see what you guys are thinking? They're just coming to me today. Just flow it.
I would love to hear it, but before I do, Grant, I would love to hear from you about some of the sponsors that make this podcast possible every single week. And then we can get into Controversy Corner with Grant Klassen.
Well, that was my statement is, hey, I would love to talk about the sponsors. That was statement number one.
Yeah.
Yes. And then statement number 2 is coming. Obviously less exciting though. So let me tell you about some of our sponsors today. The Guitar Sanctuary is where Brian is currently sitting. You can see looms of cable, pedalboard parts. There might even be a DeWalt drill in the background, which you cannot buy at the Guitar Sanctuary, but you can buy all of the gear, pedals, guitars, pedal boards, amps. We just heard that there's Mesa over there, which is a good thing. At the Guitar Sanctuary in McKinney, Texas. I would say most, if not all, of the guitar gear we talk about on this show can be found at the Guitar Sanctuary, especially some of the stuff from Vertex and Goodwood as well. So we're big fans of the Guitar Sanctuary. Check them out if you're in Texas or at theguitarsanctuary.com. I've heard Texas is a big place. Being from Canada, maybe if you're in Texas, might be a little bit of a stretch. That might be a far drive. But if you're in McKinney, the Guitar Sanctuary is where you want to go. I also want to tell you guys about Neural DSP. We talk about the Quad Cortex quite a bit on the show. Big fans of the Quad Cortex itself, but Neural also does a whole bunch of different plugins, and they just recently released the Morgan Amps Suite, which I know a lot of our listeners are really into Morgan amps. And while I was thinking about this, I just had to say, you should probably Morgan your way on over to their website and check out those plugins. I've been waiting to say that all day.
Nice.
And also Cortex Control, their desktop editor is now out of beta and has been fully released, which I know we have been waiting for and anticipating. So please check that out as well. If you want to kind of dive deeper into your Quad Cortex, that is the way to do it. Quad Cortexes are now selling for $16.99. They did a price drop a little while ago, so it's now even more affordable. If you want to get their plugins that are 90 days or older, you can get them for 30% off or 70% away from free using the code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN at neuraldsp.com. That's Chairmen for 30% off of their plugins. Lastly, I want to tell you about Sweetwater's Gear Exchange. This is a buyer-seller's market for used gear at sweetwater.com/used. The best thing about this is you can say goodbye to all of the seller fees, which I know is once I finally sell a piece of gear and I see those seller fees get knocked off of my proceeds, it hurts every time. And with Sweetwater's Gear Exchange, you can basically bypass that by keeping your proceeds on a Sweetwater gift card and buying more gear within the Sweetwater environment. You can save a whole lot of money. So it's definitely something to check out. You can buy or sell gear very easily at sweetwater.com/used. Now, guys, if you are up for me to kind of continue on with my second, less controversial, statement that I wanted to make, or less exciting statement I wanted to make, it was around Mason's comment earlier of finding your voice as a guitar player. And I have to be honest, that was a little triggering for me. But what I wanted to basically say around it, or my thought, and I want to get your guys' opinions here. My thought around this is, or my question, is it even possible for a guitar player in 2023 to have their own unique voice on guitar versus are we not all an amalgamation of the guitar players we learn, follow, look up to, and emulate, and we are kind of a fruit salad of sorts made up of a whole bunch of different voices that can then be interpreted as a unique voice depending on the combination of players that make up our voice as musicians. Is that too far?
No, you're the canned peaches of the fruit salad, Grant.
I do love a good canned peach,
Honestly.
you know. Who doesn't love a good blood sugar spike early in the morning, right?
Heavy syrup. Yeah.
But this is something in all seriousness, I've heard, more philosophical podcasts, not specifically to guitar players, but just to our creative voices. Can you say that anyone is truly unique? And I'm not saying that in a negative thing. I just think, I think we need to potentially pay tribute to where it's due and maybe look at it from a different lens or frame.
From a greater or lesser degree, everybody has influences. I think that's inescapable. I think there's people that do things that have less, like they've taken those influence, but they have a lot less in terms of their roots. Like we recently did this interview with Charlie Hunter, who had played an 8-string guitar and then 7-string guitar, and then now it's 6 strings, but 2 of the strings are bass. But he's playing bass and guitar at the same time. And his whole sensibility, although not everything about what he does is just from the Charlie's brain. There is something that like nobody is really doing what he did. He basically in the 90s had an instrument made for him by Ralph Novak with fanned frets and whatever, there's 3 bass strings I think on that, or and basically invented a style that like is through this instrument. And he would tell you that he's influenced by various players, but like the application, he has to be. It's in a select number of people that are really doing something that nobody else is experimenting with. So look at somebody like that, and he's kind of on, I think, as original of a guitar player side as you could do. Whereas somebody like John Mayer, certainly he has influences, and we can hear a lot of those influences. But I think he also has his own voice too, because it's not like people are like, I mean, there's some guys that are like dogmatic, and they're like, well, I don't listen to John Mayer because I listen to Stevie Ray Vaughan and Clapton. But they could just as easily do the same thing with Stevie Ray Vaughan and Clapton and say, well, I only listen to Albert King and I only listen to Howlin' Wolf, or Buddy Guy. They could do the same thing, and they could say, well, I don't listen to Buddy Guy because I only listen, and so there could be a continual backtracking of like, I don't listen to this guy because I only listen to his influences because he was heavily influenced by this person, and that can be reductive, and I think ultimately is kind of circular logic in a way. And if you like the music, you like the music. It inspires you, and it's okay to have influences. But I still think that guys like John Mayer, even though he's influenced, he certainly has his own voice. And I think that's, I was reminded of it the other night where there's like a guy who has like a whole channel on YouTube where he's like, plays a song, like a hit song, and he's like, if John Mayer took the solo on this song, and he interprets, like John Mayer, and it's like, yeah, there's a voice out there that John Mayer has established that is established enough where somebody can implant his sensibilities into another song. People are like, oh yeah, that does sound like something that John Mayer would do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting because even I know, man, I'm totally blanking on the guy's name, but you take certain guitar players and their seemingly unique voices, but it just comes from areas that are unrelated or not seeable from an outside eye. And, certain, like Van Halen as an example. Van Halen is, touted as has a very unique voice on guitar. And a lot of people look to him as being, he's got his own thing. But you take his ability or his skill set in playing violin before he played guitar, like, well, maybe he's so unique because he had this violin background and he approaches and looks at the instrument totally different, or piano or whatever it is. And that combination or recipe is like, that is a unique recipe for such a high level musician and guitarist that no one else, recognizably has to that degree. So now we interpret that as Eddie Van Halen has a truly unique voice on guitar, where maybe it's this unique combination of skills that most other guitar players don't have, and therefore their voices are a little bit differently on the instrument. And not to say I believe that no one can have a unique voice. I just think it's a really interesting question of where do influences come from, and can we truly, create something 100% unique and original? And I don't think the answer is yes at all for 100%, but can we take our own little takes on it here and there and slightly change it to be unique in our own way? Probably, yeah. But I just think it's an interesting thing in the context of this topic. But as far as should we be emulating our guitar heroes, I still personally stand on the fact that I absolutely think it's a great idea to do if you're willing to train your ear. Because I think a lot of this, what we're talking about today, there's like with a lot of things in life, there is a not so proactive, let's just, for the sake of extreme pendulum swings here, there's a lazy way and there is a hard way, or working hard way, to get to an end result. And I think in this context, the lazy way is just buy the gear and hope for great results. And I think the way that I'm kind of saying I think is more beneficial is, maybe buy some of the gear, but I would sit down and I would, toil over like a little bit more treble there on the TS9. It was a little bit dark, but then if I push a little bit harder on my frets when I'm up around 12, it'll brighten things up a little bit, but I can't get to the point where I'm going to, push the string sharp if I push too hard and like all this stuff. I think that work is the most beneficial work you can do. And the more artists you can do it with, the more unique your voice will then become as a guitarist. So rather than being a John Mayer copy, like, oh, that guy just plays what John Mayer does, if you can do that across 5 different artists that are not all in the same genre, you will have a unique voice on guitar.
So this is gonna sound super not silly, but there's my son and I have a 6-year-old, which is crazy. He's 6 already. It was really when I started working at the shop, he wasn't even born. Anyway, side note, but he likes to do Legos. That was super random. Well, I don't know why I had to say he was 6, but anyway, yes, he loves Legos. I also love Legos. It's just one of those things. But my son and I are very, very different characters. And this is, I would say, this is how I feel as musicians are too, is where you could be the musician that wants to sound like John Mayer. So you go and you get all of his stuff. You go get everything to the T. It's like getting Legos. You get a Lego set. It's 137 pieces. And it is going to be, the instructions how to do it from A to Z. And once you put that sucker together, you're done. And you're like, great. I put together the X-Wing starfighter from Star Wars and it's done and it's great. Or you can be, that's how my son is. But me, I'm like, I'm going to take the 10 other boxes of Legos that have probably 20 other ships and I'm going to mix and match them. I'm going to find what my favorite parts are and I'm going to build like a giant spaceship. Something not even on the map, not even in the books. Something that I totally have to create on my own. And that's also fun too. So there's like different levels of musicianship. And this is going to sound like, it may sound silly, but like my son finds joy in the structure of getting all those pieces right, putting it together and being happy with it, where I like just kind of creating my own thing, but taking parts from other ships or whatever to put it together. So the same thing can be applied to as any type of musician. Is you can cookie cut, pick out all those pedals that said person that you're trying to look up to, and you can be happy with that tone. But there's also, you could take parts of him, not little parts, but you could take pieces of his tone and apply it to you. You could take pieces from this person, and this sounds horrible. I'm not taking physical pieces from people. Let's make that very clear, people. Take his arm, and his finger.
John Mayer's tone is buried in Brian's backyard.
It really is. But what I mean is, like, you can implement different parts of the tone in your own sound and still have part of that sound, that DNA, have that sound. So many body references, I'm not trying to, but you could take all these things and implement it, but it still be your own tone. Otherwise, I think what a lot of people do is, I want to sound just like this person, and then they do that, and then, you know, they may be happy with it, or it may get boring or make it stale. Like, it's just one of those things. Like, I have one guy, he has like 30 Boss pedals on a board, and just all these Boss, I call it the Boss board for the longest time. And he's like, yeah, I can get all these different tones out of it. And I was like, well, why don't you just build single boards for those tones? He goes, no, that's not fun. Like, that's kind of that's kind of boring. So yeah, I think as musicians, you can do the either or, but I just think it was funny how I compared my son's Lego building and my Lego building with a musician.
I think any metaphor with Star Wars and Lego, I'm on board
honestly,
for it. I'm there.
Honestly. And they're the bougie Legos too, like they're the black box ones, so they're not like the super cheap ones. Yeah, right. he's got good taste. But I think that has a lot to do with it too, just because, like, you know, I think why guitarists like buying pedals too more than practicing is because it's also, the chase is fun. Like me.
And it's instant gratification.
How many years have I chased to find a white penguin or a black penguin from Gretsch? I finally got it, and I was like, now what? And I don't even have it anymore. Like, I sold it because I didn't like it as much as I thought I was gonna like it. It was just like one of those things, like, I think we like the chase of hunting down that blurry picture of a pedal that we think John Mayer is using when really it's not. He's using something else or whatever it is. I mean, it's like when Van Halen like created the tapping, like he would turn around so no one could see it, and it's like that kind of like the mystery behind how he's doing that, or the tone or whatever is kind of like the chase of it all. But yeah,
I think with your metaphor as well, with the you know, taking a bunch of different Lego sets and making your own kind of unique creation, I think if we were to apply that to music and guitar, you need to be prepared for your first few ships in this metaphor to be duds. Like, to just, for sure, what is that guy trying to do? Like, and I think you need to be able to push through. If you're going to do this, you need to be able to push through, polish your skills to the point where it's something a little bit more recognizable or has some utility for the listener and the creator and the people in the environment. But I think, I just wouldn't expect, and I'm speaking to myself just as much as anyone else, I don't think this whole pursuit, even the pursuit of playing guitar, I don't think you can expect instant results. And I think you need to be able to, push through on a timeline that is measured more in months or years, rather than I tried writing a song that encapsulated Mayer, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and Buddy Guy, and it didn't work. It's like, well, write 15 more and then tell me if they got better. And if they got better, that means your voice is evolving and you're able to communicate a little bit more efficiently, or to actually get a message across, where last time, I don't know what you were trying to do. And I just think that with this whole thing that we're talking about today, it is a long game rather than the feeling of buying a white penguin or the feeling of buying a new pedal. This instant gratification is not going to be there if you're serious about it. And so, yeah, I think we need to probably measure progress rather than measuring a quick end result that is hopefully going to be perfect, because I just don't think that exists.
I guess this is a good time to tell you about my cover band, which is called Buddy Ray John. And I've
BRJ.
I've combined all those blues artists together.
Well, I'm excited for the first album, the drop as they call it in the biz. I can't wait. What guitar are you going to play as we? I guess it has to be a Strat. Now that I say that out loud.
Yeah. Well,
polka dots on the back.
I bought all their signature Strats, and then we've used a third of each of them. You know,
nice.
So
Glue them together.
Yeah.
John Mayer's neck, polka dots on the back. Not Starburst.
No, it's
Sunburst
on
the front.
It's a 3-piece neck, so it's partially maple for Buddy Guy, and then there's some rosewood. We just
you could do one guitar with 3 necks, like a 3-necked guitar.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
When I want to sound like Buddy, I use this one. Yeah. It could be cool. That could be cool when we perform at the Monster Truck Rally. I think the thing that I hope people are not taking from this is that, like, we're shaming people that are that are trying to go after these sounds, because I know that I've spent a lot of time in the Stevie Ray Vaughan, John Mayer, Eric Clapton gear. I've bought a lot of the same stuff. I've seen them use certain things, and I've been swept up in the idea that will get me closer to a specific sound or closer to a tone in a specific song that I really like. But I think that the reality is that there are small elements that can encapsulate sort of the broader ideas sonically that are put forward by your favorite artist. And obviously it's no secret, but if it's John Mayer, it's like, none of us are likely going to own a Dumble, or at least the one that he has, or one at all, to be frank, because there's only a few hundred of these out there. They're highly sought after. They're very expensive. And so already we're going to have to make some sort of compromise. And I would be the first to say Fender amp, clean, high headroom Fender amp that you can turn up loud. Or turn up loud in your environment, So for the apartment player, that may look like a Blues Junior, or a Fender Champ. I don't know. For a guy that has lives in the country and has no neighbors, no shared walls, maybe they can get away with getting the 2-rock or something like that. Where it is very similar to a Dumble style. It's got a lot of headroom. They're really loud, and you can crank that up, and nobody's going to complain. I think that you have to sort of take what your environment is and modulate down to whatever is going to get you that level of amp saturation, because a lot of that stuff is involving speaker distortion and amp distortion because of how loud the amps are, and then the pedals are just kind of small adjustments to that kind of core amp sound, and so we're talking about Tube Screamer, Klon, a short slap back delay, and getting anything that would be similar to those, like Tube Screamers are cheap enough to get if you want to get an Ibanez TS9. It's not going to be that much different characteristically than the TS10 that John Mayer uses. It's going to be slightly different, but it's still going to be roughly the same sound. And like the differences between those things are not something that I don't think anybody would be perceptible if John Mayer were using an out of the box reissued TS9 versus his actual TS10. Like these are close enough where they're not going to make a huge difference. Just as I don't think that if he played with a J-Rocket Archer versus his actual Klon, that there's going to be an appreciable difference of how he sounds in practice. So like those differences are really minimal. The slapback delay, do you have to get an original Aquapus? No, you don't. You could get an analog delay, you could get a carbon copy, you could get something that's similar that's going to produce that single slapback. There's just like little things like that like, sure, it's nice as a fan to know that you have the exact same thing. But practically, as somebody if you're really committed to the tone, you can definitely get something that is similar for a lot less money and be able to get right in Tone Town very easily
Yeah.
as it relates to that. And honestly, I think that the biggest X factor, like with people with those sort of sounds, is that it's so hard for amateur guitar players or hobbyist guitar players to be able to run an amp like our heroes do. Because when they're in a recording session, they can run that amp as loud as they want. When they're playing in a live performance, they can run that amp as loud as they want, presumably. So they don't have a lot of limitations as far as volume. And those things matter as far as the tone is concerned. So like you trying to use a 100-watt amp in an apartment, it just is never going to get you that level of saturation because you just can't get it that loud. So having to consider like, maybe I only need a 10-watt amp for my environment because I just can't do that other stuff. And that actually, in my world, gets me closer to that sound than the actual gear would. So I think those sorts of decisions are really important. Do you guys have any feedback to people that want to use the gear? Like, how do you suggest to your customers, let's say if they're coming to you with something like this, they want to sound like Santana, they want to sound like Clapton, they want to sound like Andy Timmons, whoever it is. How do you usually try to shift their expectations if they're, say, an apartment player or they're in a condo or a townhouse, or like they just can't do an arena level volume? What do you tell them as far as kind of like how to pivot?
Typically, I tell them to sell their place first, the go live out in the middle of nowhere. No. Yep. I typically will just ask them, like, I'm just honest. It's kind of like going and buying a car. Like when you go there, the sales, hey, have you looked around before? Do you kind of know what you want? It's the same kind of concept. Like, okay, so that's the tone that you're wanting. I want to see where you've gone. Okay, great. Well, what kind of research have you done? Do you know exactly what you're looking for? Yeah, I want that. Lays it out, the shopping list of everything they want. And then from there, it's not nitpicking, but it's like, okay, well, to realize to do these certain things, you have to be able to crank your amp. You have to be able to do this. Where are you living? Because as soon as they say apartment, I'm like, well, that's a huge thing, or a townhome or whatever. So I'll give them options like, okay, you can go into like an aux box or a load box, something that you can capture your entire rig and stuff, and you can wear headphones. And I always preface it with, it's not going to sound identical, because unless that box has the exact type of captured speaker or something in it. But I was like, but you can emulate or get as close as possible you can with it. So you can get the board, you can get the guitar, you can get the 100-watt amp head, but I was like, and you can get the speaker cabinet if you're going to gig live. But I always say, like, if you need something that's a little quieter or something that you can do at home, realistically you're going to need some kind of load box that you can run into, that you can turn the speaker off, put headphones on, or just bring down your whole speaker volume. So once I kind of give that, they'll go, oh, okay, yeah, well, I mean, I am only playing at home, so I don't need that 412, or I'm only doing this, so I don't need that. Oh yeah, I am actually playing at a gig where we all use in-ear monitors and no stage volume, so that would probably be helpful. So like when I start asking the questions, these are questions that to me, I ask every single day, but to these guys, they don't think about some of these things. Like, oh yeah, I never thought about it that way. I'm like, yeah, there's no harm. There's just other things that besides what you've already thought about. So yeah, I typically, once I ask that, it helps kind of gauge their expectation. And I'm never going to be like, no, you can't get that sound, get it out of your head, because that's not true. Like, we can do it. There's just other things, like I want to sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan. Shut up. No, you don't.
Leave the guitar station.
Leave your guitar. Don't even come back. Like, no, I would never do that. And I never want someone to come in. The worst thing is this, and I've experienced this before, and it was literally the worst. Someone came, I wasn't here, it was somewhere else. I was at some like guitar shop, like when I was out of town, and I was looking at something, and someone came in looking for something, and they basically were just like, yeah, you're never going to sound like him anyway, so don't even try to buy that pedal or something, or buy that amp or something. And the kid was like, oh, okay, and like left. And like to any guitarist, like that would suck. That's like, building out your pedal board and then showing up to your gig and someone's like, that's trash. And you're like, why? Like, I love it. Like, why are you crapping on my stuff? Like, the kind of thing. Not physically, metaphorically. But I have
everything Brian is saying today, please, metaphors, guys. Metaphor.
Everything is metaphorically.
Brian Omilion told me to.
Brian Omilion told me to crap on my rig. No. But no, anyway, I just think that instead of just automatically shooting someone down and, just telling them no, it's best I've always just given them options. And sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't, and sometimes they go, oh yeah, I'm just gonna play my 412 100 watt amp or whatever, and all my apartment people can, deal with it. I mean, that's fine.
Sounds like an eviction notice.
It sounds like something, police or something. Yeah, noise complaint. But anyway, yeah. So that's how I approach it. I just give them the options after I get some history, because knowing how much research they've done will go a long way into how easy it is to pivot.
I think there's another big thing to consider, which we've kind of alluded to, but I'll bring it up. I think when I was back in Sydney, I played for a large church there every week, multiple times a week. And at the campus that we were at, I knew my sound to a T. Like, if the front of house guy moved my 57 off my speaker by an inch, I could tell in my in-ears, 100 feet away. And so I knew my sound really well. And then when I went to play at like the main campus, my sound was completely different. Mics were the same. All my gear was obviously the same, but it sounded so much better. And I asked the guys on the monitors, like, what's up? Like, what's different from the city campus? And they basically said the preamps in that monitor desk were a lot better, had a lot more headroom. They translated the sound a lot better. I thought I was like king of the world with how good my guitar sounded. The only thing that changed were the preamps. And so when we look at people like Mayer or, people playing these stadium gigs or in studio, it's one thing to get their amp and guitar and pedals, but the sound that they are getting, like, you would have to recreate all these elements, even before we talk about technique and approach, these elements that make a huge difference on the sound. And so that's where I think, again, sorry to keep repeating myself, but I think the most important thing you can have if you want to emulate someone's tone is the ability to listen and recreate rather than purchase. Because if you can tweak the tone on your amp and tweak the string gauge, type of picks you're using, EQ, then you can maybe make up for some of those, in this example, external hardware differences that are outside of the guitar rig but affect the tone, like a preamp or the mic placement or whatever it might be. If you can make adjustments for that with your ears, you will get way closer. And you could be using a completely different make or model of amp, and you will still get closer than if you don't account for those differences yourself on the listening side and recreating side. And so that's where, with customers that come to me with that type of stuff, some of them come very well researched and they just want what they want, and that's great, and that's fine. But a lot of times, like, I want to get close to SRV's sound, then it's you're going to have to practice your tone and technique, and you're going to have to just do a lot of listening, and we'll get the gear as close as your budget will allow. But I think that's a lesser of the few valid points that you really need to worry about. I think the big thing is get some reliable gear and just sit down and start practicing, because that's really what it's going to take to get you most of the way there. Those are my repetitive thoughts. But before we keep moving on what I can only imagine will be more repetitive thoughts from me, sorry guys, we're going to throw to Brian for our last few sponsors of today's episode.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so our last three final great sponsors are going to be the guys over at monocreators.com. They have a discount code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, for 10% off. Mono, as you know, they have great soft cases for pedalboards, for dual guitars, acoustic electrics, double electrics. They have all sorts of great gig bags, backpacks. I have a few of them. Slanted pedalboards. They're new. They have like a new rail angled pedal boards, some power strips, some carbon fiber flat boards. So they have a lot of really great stuff, really small necessity, like utility bags that can connect to your guitar bags. So check them out. Use the discount code Chairman for 10% off. You will not be disappointed. They have top-notch quality stuff. I highly recommend it, and I have multiples as do these guys, and they're fantastic. So check them out at monocreators.com. Then we got the guys over at Stringjoy. Stringjoy is a great company that they supply all sorts of bass and electric guitar strings, maybe acoustic strings. I'm not exactly sure, but they have strings that can get you, a couple, if you need to buy them in subscription platform, you can buy in subscription and get a bulk of them in at a time. So you don't have to worry about heading to a local guitar shop after work to pick up strings. You can just have them shipped straight to your door. So go use the guys at stringjoy.com. Use the code BOARDS for 10% off and check them out today. Last is going to be the guys over at Besttronics or btpa.com. They have a code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, for 10% off. These guys supply all the connectors that you see that we have. The power connectors, the 2.1, 2.5 millimeter plugs, different looms, cables, racks. They do it all. They supply so many cables I didn't know even existed. So make sure you use that code. Let Brad and them know that the Chairman sent you. Use the code DACHAIRS for 10% off.
Awesome.
Nice.
Well, guys, to close out today, I want to just briefly touch on some of where maybe in our own guitar playing, maybe Tone Jesus for you is Nigel Hendroff. Maybe Tone Jesus for you is John Mayer. Maybe Tone Jesus for you is Buddy Guy, who doesn't even use pedals except a wah-wah. Where maybe in your own guitar playing or your own gear journey have you learned these lessons or kind of the inspirations that you've had and how you've had to modulate your expectations or your gear choices to kind of fit maybe not exactly the gear hero that you looked up to or the tone hero that you looked up to, and how you've maybe made those adaptations in your own rigs or kind of how it's evolved what you've done over time. Are there any examples of this that still have some remnants in the rig that you currently have? Or maybe what has been the process by which you've kind of maybe freed yourself from some of those pedals because you found that although they were very good for the player that you really love, they just turned out that they weren't that great for you. And you could maybe sound that way that you heard them using something completely different.
I remember, would have been probably well over 10 years ago now, I had to learn a song by Toto and Rosanna.
What was the song? Okay,
Rosanna by Toto. I spent...
That was for church, huh?
It was for church. I think the Australian Idol people were coming into church and they were like doing a fun musicians night thing. And they had the youth band learn a song, the young kids. Then they had the church band learn a song, which was what I was a part of. And then they had all like the album guys come in and play. So like Nige and Rolf and all those guys. And so for the church band, we had to learn Rosanna. I spent over 10 hours on the solo alone, which tells you how bad I am at soloing. But it was unbelievable. And it opened my eyes to Toto, who I knew existed, but I'd never really gone down that path. And so I didn't have the time or the budget to go in and be like, all right, what does Steve Lukather use? What am I going to do to, replicate the sound? It was literally, this is what I have in front of me for gear. I need to get as close as possible. And that's just what I have to learn this song over the next couple days. And tonal wise, I mean, I definitely didn't have anything Steve Lukather would use. It would still have been my AC30 and TS9, maybe another higher gain pedal, a Blues Breaker style pedal. But between those, I was able to get the sound close enough to where it was passable for sure. My playing, maybe not as much, but it was such a good exercise to listen to this guitar player who instantly was like, man, this guy knows how, obviously he can move around the fretboard, but he knows how to voice and create a solo that fits the song and progresses the song to the next section and says something. And I absolutely loved it. And from there, my respect and love of Steve Lukather and Toto only grew. But I think that was an example, I think more on the side that I wish I could say I did all the time, which I do not, which is where I took what I had and then I tweaked it to suit the context of which I was trying to replicate or imitate. But I, like, all the time, I get trapped up in this pedal is what this guy uses, I just want to go out and buy it and that'll get me closer. And then either I don't play the pedal for months, I just was happy to buy it, or I don't sound anything like the guy because I'm not willing to put in the work like I did in that first example of 10 hours on a 16 bar phrase to try and replicate it. And I just think that the voice that I have as a guitar player and the ability that I have to communicate really falls on those 10-hour sessions more than it does on the gear purchasing. And now I'm much more confident over, years of playing. I think I started when I was 11 years old, and now I'm a few years away from 40. So playing for this long, now I'm able to, take a song and hear a tone and be like, oh, I hear a bit of reverb in there. That's a digital delay that's on a short repeat. And these overdrives, I think that I have will actually get me pretty close to that sound into whatever amp I have in front of me. I'm much more confident in that than when I was younger. It was literally just buy whatever pedal is in front of me, and then I'll just have a play with absolutely no clue what I was doing.
Yeah. You have much better tone literacy.
I would say it's grown. I would not say I'm an expert in that area. Like Mason, you've done a lot of work in this area, and so I would have plenty to learn in that front. But I have grown. I've progressed. I will say that, and now it's just a lot more fun. It's almost the challenge is to use your gear to get a drastically different tone. Is it possible? I'm going to go find out. I think that is a lot more fun than, at least for me, than just going out to purchase a piece of gear that I know will get me a lot of the way there tonally because it's what the artist used. But I just think a lot of the fun is actually the struggle. The push to create something with limited resources is where your best ideas tend to come from. And so that'd be my take. Brian, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, when I started playing, same kind of thing, 10, 11,
but you're much younger than me and a better guitar player.
No, I'll be 31 next month.
Oh my gosh.
So, but like when I first started playing, definitely being like raised in church and whatnot, not physically at the church, but
metaphor.
Metaphorically, all these metaphors today. Today's just a metaphor. It's gonna be.
You can fit in a couple more, man. You can fit in a couple more before the end of the episode.
Our kids barely slept last night, so I guess
you should ask Seal about that.
I should.
You should ask him. He's got a song where he says, "Why must we dream in metaphors?" Ask him about that.
I'll shoot him a text.
That's Seal 2.
Seal 2. But yeah, no, I definitely took when Nigel was on, I definitely had said, which was funny how he's like, it's crazy to him how people mimic his rigs. I did the same thing, and that's how I started off. But it was also I think starting off mimicking someone's rig is okay until while you're finding your sound, because there's a lot of stuff I had on my board, and Facebook, good old Facebook, gives you those memory reminders on this day 15 years ago. Yeah, I have the worst ones. A side note, I had one from 20 years ago that said, I always thought I had to do my name, Brian Omilion, and put it is and whatever I wanted to say for no reason. I don't understand why I did that. But one of them, it was like Brian Omilion is making mashed potatoes. And Facebook had to remind me that 20 years ago.
Is that code or?
Nope, I was straight up making mashed potatoes.
11-year-old
I
Brian.
was 11 years
What
old,
trouble was he getting into?
I had to tell the world. But Facebook, after the wonderful mashed potatoes post, there was another one of a board I had. And I had like a MXR 10 band EQ, which you should have seen the EQ. Oh my gosh, it was like a deep V-neck on a worship player's t-shirt.
Well, you're supposed to use the EQ dials to draw pictures, right? Like that's how you get a good sound.
It's like an
Totally.
Etch-a-Sketch.
Yeah, exactly. That's how you get the best tones.
Mine always looked like an X-wing.
Is that a pine?
But I had like that, and I had a fuzz. I never used it, but it's because I didn't know what these were. But I was taking pedals from a rig and thinking I needed it and throwing it on there. But after a while, I started going, well, I don't step on that. Oh, I don't use that. Okay, I could sell it. And instead of like going and buying another, like me, I've only ever used one overdrive and one boost. That's just how I've always been. And I don't have 7 or 8 overdrives on boards, and that's your thing. That's your thing. But I think starting off, having a good foundation to start your tone journey, road to Tone Town. You know, it's like us in the Miata having a good foundational car to take us to Tone Town. Like you have to start somewhere to get to where you want to go. So starting off with having someone else's rig until you kind of shape it really helps along the way. And now I use like a delay and a reverb and an overdrive, and that's about it. Like I'm really simple. I have had a synesthesia, but I wasn't using it a lot. Like I had, a compressor, I wasn't using it a lot. There's all these things that I start figuring out because it fits my tone and stuff. So, I think along the ways I've definitely learned what I prefer and don't prefer, and what I just end up not needing or using, because I'm not in case I need this. I'm always in the mindset, do I need this right now? Like I'm the opposite of the clientele that I would be working with. I'm like, think about the future, think about your rig in the future. Me, I'm just like, I'm just gonna use what I need right now. I'll switch it out later. Like it's a whole thing. But that's what I would say. I think along the way I've definitely taken from a source and then kind of crafted it, like my fantastic Lego metaphor,
which was a good one.
Thank
I would
you.
say as well, even, and this applies as you're saying that, Brian, I was thinking that even with pedalboard builds, and Mason, I don't know if you would agree, but the biggest lessons I have learned pedalboard building, what has made me the best, not in the field, as in the best version of myself building pedalboards. What has made me the best has been after those pedalboards where I just wanted to quit. I just wanted to rip my hair out because I couldn't figure something out, some strange noise. But then after I got through it, I now had experience that could only be earned. It could not be purchased. It could not be just told to me by someone else necessarily. I had to go through this very frustrating time. And I think in a parallel sense, I think a lot of the stuff with finding your voice as a guitar player, emulating your heroes, is just going to be a similar thing. There's going to be some frustrating moments, but then you look back like, oh, that's when I figured out how SRV did the bend. Like that was the time it took a couple of bloody fingers, some broken strings, and had to do all this. But once I got that, I nailed that technique and I could move on from there. And I just think that other than maybe a frustrating credit card bill, that is never going to happen from buying a piece of gear. It's only going to happen from the struggle of trying to replicate to the closest degree you possibly can, and then you move forward. And so I don't know. I hate to sound like, some greeting card, but I think the best things really do come out of some pretty frustrating and hard work and just putting in the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll have those available on our next episode. Is greeting cards? Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry you're frustrated with
greeting
your
cards
tone.
with a negative twist.
Better days ahead.
Exactly.
Here, get well soon. Hope your tone hope your tone pulls through. Guys, thanks so much for being here today. Thanks for indulging this conversation on should you sound like your guitar hero? Should you attempt to sound like them? Should you track down your gear? I don't know if it was helpful to anybody, but it's nice to reminisce nonetheless. And it's nice to be here with you two gentlemen. Thank you for being here. And until next time, we will hop back into Grant's Miata, Canadian license plates, I should say.
It's got winter tires.
BC, yep. It's got the snow tires on it, and chains. Rear wheel drive, I think, on the Miata. So on the back two tires.
Yep. Nice.
And we'll see you a little further down the road to Stonetown.
See you
Bye,
guys.
guys.